Welcome to Becoming Spiritual, a podcast about the magic that surrounds us and has always been a part of us. I'm your host, Heather Dolan, a passionate seeker dedicated to bringing together beautiful humans who are doing amazing things in this world. Together, we will explore healing modalities and practical spiritual practices that can enrich your everyday life. We will also hear stories of awakenings, many from people in the corporate world who have broken out of the spiritual closet. Wherever you are in your journey, know you have found a community of open-hearted individuals committed to making themselves and our world a better place. Welcome home. Welcome back to Becoming Spiritual. I'm your host, Heather, and I'm here with my magical friend, Natalie, who you've gotten to know.
Hey, Heather and audience.
Yeah, she's waving at us. And so we're going to do something fun today. Natalie had the idea to kind of kick us off for the podcast in a way where we could maybe share some information up front. So as we go through the season and talk about different topics and spiritual concepts, that those that this all might be new to, that we can talk a little bit about some of those things to kind of give a little bit of a foundation, I guess, on some things that we're going to be addressing. So we're going to have a fun conversation today, and I'm going to let Natalie share what it is we're doing. So Natalie, take it away.
Well, I thought it would be really great before we start interviewing people, exploring all the different aspects and tangents of spirituality, spiritual practices, modalities, that we actually just have a chat together about what even is spirituality. What is it to become spiritual? And I wanted to make it as beginner friendly as possible. Because I know people will be coming across your podcast and having really big questions and perhaps are very new to this topic. And so I thought, what better place to start than going on Google and checking out the top search terms around spirituality and making that the kind of framework for our conversation today. So what do you think?
Yeah, I love that. Good old Google. We know as soon as you hear something, as I mentioned, we Google it, so we're going to be your Googlers today.
Awesome. All right, so the first big question, why not go to like the most important question first, is what is spirituality? And I know that this can be a really tough question to answer, and spirituality can be a very complex concept to define. So
I think it also has a negative connotation too for people. Yeah.
Yeah. And that actually came up in the Google search. Is spirituality evil? What is the negative part of spirituality? So that's really interesting. Do you want to start there?
Sure. Which I think makes me sad because it's I think when you start to explore spirituality, it's really just about the remembering of who we are and why we're here, which is what most people, I think, when they're looking into this, I would imagine that's like almost at the heart of the question. It's like the root of what am I doing here? And I feel like spirituality is almost a framework to really discover that and explore that and how I think of it. So to me, when I think of what spirituality is, it's just the remembering of who we are and why we're here, which to me and in my belief system is we all need to remember that we're here to remember the love that we came into this world with, that we are here to share with others, and not in a weird religious way, which I know we're going to talk about that, where it's like kumbaya, I have to love everybody, and no matter what someone does, I'm okay with it, because that's not what that means. And I think that's really important. But at the same time, when I think of spiritual, I just think of everything around us. And now I see, for me, after digging into this for a number of years, I see everything as spiritual. It's everything that's around us. Everything technically has a spirit. So just as our indigenous brothers and sisters who were here long before us believed that trees had spirits and rocks had spirits. And I think in our day-to-day, we don't acknowledge any of that. We think humans are just human-centric. Everything revolves around humans. And I think spirituality brings everything into the fold, where we are all important. We're all a part of this world living here. And so for me, it's just, when I think of it, I see this big, like, arms open out, kind of hugging everything, bringing everything into really our everyday. And just also for me as well, which I know we'll talk a little bit about awakening, it's seeing all the magic that's around us. There's so much magic. And for me, that's a big part of spirituality. It's not a religious thing. It's not something that has to be structured. It's what you see as magical and beautiful and filled with love. And it doesn't have to be defined by anyone other than you.
Yeah,
What
definitely.
about you?
Well,
I know you're
oh
going to
my
go
gosh.
much more like esoteric, and I know you're going to have some beautiful things to say about this. So
I was thinking of all kinds of things while you were talking, but actually I want to keep this beginner friendly, not go on my usual tangents. So for me, I think it's as simple as with spirit or of spirit, it is the immaterial. It is of spirit with spirit. And that spirit, as you mentioned, is all around us, but also inside of us. And at some point in our lives, we start to question the material. And I think that's what this spirituality is, kind of like everything that's more than the material. In our material reality, we have been taught to not really value our spiritual selves, which is, all of that stuff that lives inside of us that you spoke of, Heather, the seeking meaning and purpose and truth. And yeah, that part of us wants to live and experience magic. And so that's really what spirituality and being on a spiritual path, if we want to call it that, means to me in the most simplest form. I love contemplating and pondering this. And I have so many other tangents I could go on, but really that's what it all boils down to for me.
So I know when I looked up, when I first was trying to put together my kind of first episode and figure out what I wanted to share, when you look up spiritual, it says it's the adjective form of the word spirit, which comes from the Latin word for breath. And that means a thing that animates life. And so if you think about it, really spirituality is what has given us actual physical life in these bodies. So when I think of that, I can just picture this, kind of breath, and we'll talk about kind of defining God, spirit, whatever reference you want to use, but almost this kind of like poof breath. Here we are, and we're in these bodies. And so I think that really, I don't know, I love that in terms of just thinking about how, spirit in the spiritual sense comes into play in the words. But I want to hear what you found.
Yeah. So spirit is interesting because it can mean a few different things. Like the spirit is not the body. So that's one part of it. It's like I said, the non-material aspect of self. And like other words we can use to describe that are the soul, the inner self, the inner beings, all of those nice words. And then you've got spirits, like we kind of think of Casper the Friendly Ghost, There's otherworldly beings that are not physical. So that's another aspect too, because you've got the spirit within us and the spirit within all living things. And then you've also got the spirit that exists outside of us that has a lot of the myth and the stories and even the superstitions and fear around it. Because I don't think many people are afraid or have confusing feelings or negative feelings about the spirit that exists within us. We don't feel that way about our soul, but we do feel that about the spirits, the spirit realm, all of those things. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's been used as a fear tactic to almost move people away from almost digging into this more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I prepared some notes too here around the definition, because I love looking into different definitions. And I really like this definition that I found from Brené Brown, who you and your listeners might be familiar with her. You tell me about her, Heather.
Yeah, personal development guru. She's got, I have many of her books upstairs. So I think, in my personal development journey, for sure, she played a part. So I'm guessing probably most people are familiar with her.
Yeah. She's very wise as well.
She
Like
is.
she speaks truth in a really clear way.
With science. She loves the science. That's what I think pulls people in, as she does research, and she's really thoughtful before she introduces something, which I think is what helps give people almost, it helps them feel like there's some credibility around some of the things she talks about that are, you know, maybe more spiritual in nature. And I don't think she really goes down that rabbit hole a lot in terms of directly calling it spiritual, but it's about existing every day. And so, yeah, I love her work.
And she says a lot of spiritual stuff, like you said, without needing to call it that, which is very useful, I think, in kind of spreading the message. But
Yep.
and attracting different people to think about this stuff, to think about life and purpose and meaning more deeply. But yeah, in regards to spirituality, she defined it in one of her books. Forgive me, I can't remember which book it was, but what she said was, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives.
Wow. That's a good one.
Yeah, right.
I'm wondering if that was an Atlas of the Heart, which I feel like would make sense, but I don't know. Maybe it was earlier work, so I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. If you're interested, I'll find the source of that quote and I'll make sure it's in the show notes. Put a little note for me here. But yeah, because it's really interesting. Things can, like, when I want to talk about this stuff, I often want to talk about the occult aspect or even more so the esoteric aspect, like the hidden wisdom, because I practice the tarot and energy medicines, and they're kind of like these modalities and like it's knowledge that not everyone has. However, the way Brené Brown spoke about spirituality is something that's common with everyone. It doesn't matter what tools or modalities you know. Spirituality.
It's accessible.
Yeah, and it's inherent actually too. It's innate in each and every one of us that it's about connection and love and compassion and perspective and meaning and purpose. That's not about the
all
tools.
The things.
Yeah, that's about being here in this body on earth, living a life with all the other people doing the same thing.
And what I love about that too is it does feel like you don't have to be doing those things. Like you mentioned, you don't have to be reading cards or practicing Reiki or even into any of that to be spiritual, because you just are by literally being in this body and being here. So you're automatically in the spiritual club if you're listening to this.
And something else we talked about that we both found in our own paths of research around like how do we define what spirituality is was an interesting resource from a woman called Dr. Maya Spencer from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which perhaps wouldn't necessarily be a source that we would normally go to find the definition of spirituality, but we both found it to be quite good. She says, spirituality involves the recognition of a feeling or sense or belief that there is something greater than myself, something more to being human than sensory experience, and that the greater whole of which we are a part is cosmic or divine in nature. Spirituality means knowing that our lives have significance in a context beyond a mundane everyday existence at the level of biological needs that drive selfishness and aggression. It means knowing that we are a significant part of a purposeful unfolding of life in our universe. Spirituality involves exploring certain universal themes: love, compassion, altruism, life after death, wisdom and truth, with the knowledge that some people, such as saints or enlightened individuals, have achieved and manifested higher levels of development than the ordinary person. Aspiring to manifest these tributes of such inspirational examples often becomes an important part of the journey through life for spiritually inclined people. Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, all of it. I love that this is a psychiatrist who's writing this. It feels like she's trying to open up, like, from a professional perspective, like here's how I see this. And I feel like she does a really beautiful job kind of capturing the essence. She brings everything in from the spiritual teachers, people who are what we see as enlightened, that I could see I could see a lot of people kind of using air quotes of enlightened, like as if they're more special than us, and just kind of this out there concept. So I like that she kind of brings everything into the mix, and that it just feels like she's kind of, hey, I've done this work and here's how I see this. And it just, it really resonated with me.
Yeah, she spoke of similar themes like Brene Brown, like love, compassion, altruism. But then she mentioned some specific things like life after death, which often is something that I know in my story that I shared with you, it was at that particular moment, that precise moment actually, where I was like, for the first time in my life, questioning my own mortality, faced with that I started to ponder the meaning of things. And I think that's super common to lots of people.
Yeah. Think of Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters. He was I believe he was the chair at Yale of the psychiatry department,
Wow.
and he's gone through, it's funny because he was part of my journey initially, where it gives a lot of credibility that he wrote this book. And it was like in the 80s, I think, which it's an amazing book. And so you hear this psychiatrist, because he was a doctor at the time, sharing, he's just trying to help patients through hypnosis. So he's doing hypnosis in a very clinical way. And so it's about his work with this woman, and I want to say her name's Catherine, and how it takes him into this past life. And he's questioning, wait, what is happening here? And he's this very scientific doctor who's just trying to kind of follow these, protocols for hypnosis. And of course, it just launches him into his whole path. And he is one of the world's foremost experts, and probably, I'm guessing, one of the most well-known from a past life regression perspective. And he has, I don't know, like dozens of books. And I actually got to see him and meet him a year and a half ago, which was really special because he was such a part of my journey. But anyway, I love that there are people who are out there, even like a Brene Brown, where she's very well known. She's very educated. She believes in research, but she understands these concepts of spirituality. And same thing with Brian Weiss, that you learn so many people who have been really focused on the science. And it's like you can prove. It's like the universe is trying to say it's all related. It's not separate. It's not either you believe in science or you believe in something spiritual. It's all a part of it. And so I feel like this is just another kind of bringing that into the fold.
Definitely. All right. We've got a few more questions to answer here. So let's go to the next question. How is spirituality different from religion? This is something that people, I think, have lots of questions about, because some people think that they're the same thing. Some people think that they are completely different. Some people are confused because they've left behind their religion, but all of a sudden they're thinking about source or God or whatever you want to call that kind of creator concept, and they get confused. It's like, I don't like religion, but I still have this like deep yearning to know why I'm here and to understand what happens after I die or something like that. So how do you describe spirituality in relation to religion?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, because I know in my own personal experience, I grew up in a not super structured religion. I was Presbyterian. So that's, when I think of kind of the religions and having structure and maybe more kind of fire and brimstone-y type stuff, that wasn't my experience. My religious upbringing was really beautiful. Our church community was part of family. I still think of them that way. They helped take care of my family. It was part of who I was. But at the same time, when I look at religion now, I think this is where some of the negativity comes in, because it feels like in order to, kind of step into this more spiritual space, which again is ironic because you're already spiritual, but to kind of maybe turn that page or explore more, you have to let go of any religion because it feels blasphemous, or, we've been taught that those things, are evil, for lack of a better word, magic, or people, connecting with the unseen or whatever that looks like, that was, something to be condemned. I think that there's a really deep ingrainment in people feeling like this structure is how it is. And when you look at religion versus spirituality, it really is just, as I see it, like if you look at the Bible, it's a book of stories, but we give it tremendous power of this is the word of God. That's what we've been told. Literally when you're listening to a sermon, it's like, this is the word of God. And I think for me now, with my lens, I think this is the word of men who wrote these stories down in a way that gives us a perspective that sadly for a lot of people was trying to control. And it's not the whole story. And what I love when you start exploring different things, there are so many teachers that have, for instance, I think of like Dolores Cannon using quantum hypnosis, and we're going to do a whole episode on that, if not maybe multiples, and tapping into literally Jesus's teachers and the magic he had, and really dispelling a lot of things in the Bible for it being, ironic, or I guess, pun intended, gospel, that this was the truth. And it's really the truth of the lens of whoever's writing it at the time. And we all know how that works. If all of a sudden something doesn't fit a narrative, it's like, oh, let's just put that to the side and not include that bit. Let's not include this, kind of thing that happened because we can't really explain it. And it's going to move people away from the church and feeling like they need the church. And so I very much respect people's religious beliefs. And I think it gives a good foundation. And that foundation to me is loving one another, which I think is, the foundation of everything. It's love, it's respect, it's caring for one another, using, being kind with your words, helping your neighbor, all those things. There's so many good things that come from religion. But I feel like when you start down this path, there is a bit of an unwinding that you have to do of, I've been taught all of these concepts and there's very structured framework about how I should think about things or what I should believe, how I should celebrate a holiday. I know for me and my personal story with some people who are very close to me, that was their biggest hurdle to embracing a lot of things that that we're going to talk about. And it's because of that spiritual piece. They actually feel like it's this uncomfortableness where you're starting to shed this skin of like, these are all the things I was taught and that kind of comforted me in my life, that I could pray to God, which of course you can do, that I would go to church if I needed something. And I see that as you're going to a community that loves you. And it doesn't have to be you're going to church to do confession or communion. Those aren't the things that are actually healing you. It's probably being in community with people who are there in a loving space versus kind of coming to these really structured, it's a ritual, just like anything, communion and those kinds of things. So anyway, I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but I do know this is a big, like when I think of spirituality, this is like a big wall to climb for people who have been very indoctrinated into organized religion. And I think that's the thing. That's probably the term I would use, is people who are in very organized religions. You're taught a certain way, you're taught what to believe, and spirituality questions all of that because you need to believe what resonates with you. And so that feels so uncomfortable for people. It's literally like the thing that's, I think, probably shuts down people exploring for a while because it's too much to handle, because they kind of everything religious, religions, church, they put everything in a neat container and really in a book. It's kind of all tied up into this book, and that's all the information you need to know. And all of a sudden it's like, that's not even scratching the surface of all of these things. So I don't know. So I'm curious what you think about it, but this like hits home for me because I had so many personal experiences with people struggling a lot, that if they went down this road, that all of a sudden they were damning themselves, because they had to leave their religion behind. And I don't believe that at all. I think I have a much different appreciation and lens as I look at organized religion, to take what I need and then leave all the things that don't resonate for me. What about you?
Yeah,
I
that
know
whole
you obviously have a really, really different experience with religion and organized religion.
Yeah, and that's something that I like shared with you in our episode where we first came together to talk about my story. It is interesting. There's so much to this question, and I think so much of what you said is spot on. I think that the hierarchy thing is something that is quite challenging for me, because I do agree with you. Like, I actually have a lot of respect for people with religious conviction, because being in a religion is spiritual, it's just a different framework. So, and some people will go through that framework and still have questions and still feel something missing, and that they need to go on their own journey of discovery, and that might lead them away from their religion. It might lead them back to their religion. It might lead them to a place where they can do both. So something that you said about praying, for instance, that's where I was like, oh yeah, there's a big difference for me, and it's around that relationship with God. That, especially for me, I grew up in the Catholic system, and there's a very strong hierarchy there, to the point where there is confession and things like this, where you don't even get to have that relationship one-on-one with God. I think there's a lot of other branches of Christianity where it's much more focused on your personal relationship with God. Not so much in Catholicism, because there's these conduits of greater access than you get to have. Yeah. So that is something that I find challenging, just being born. So in the Catholic system, I'm born with original sin. I'm immediately a sinner, and I've got to be seeking kind of forgiveness for that. And, following the fantastic teachings of Jesus to kind of redeem myself. But on the other hand, from a spiritual perspective, I'm born with divinity. Like, I am a fragment or a fractal of the Creator. If the Creator is perfection, then I hold that perfection too. And we're all imperfect, because we're all like on the journey of remembering that about ourselves. And we've come here to explore what it is to be human and be flawed and all of those things in this beautifully magical material reality. But yeah, like, because I am a fragment of Source, part of the relationship with God is the relationship I have with myself. And part of that is the relationship I have with whatever power I believe is the Creator. And I can define what that looks like for me, which is different from, as you mentioned, a religion with a very structured framework, very rigid rules about what is good and what is bad, and who has which power in the hierarchy and all of these things. So yeah, I think there's like a different belief system, I guess, that you develop on the path of spirituality that's different to being involved in a religion. Yeah, the other part is, I wanted to talk about another aspect of this, is when you come to spirituality from being an atheist, because not everyone is religious.
Yeah, true.
There's people who are super confused coming into being all of a sudden feeling whole and having really important, deep questions, and not really having any framework for what that is, because they are atheist. And what is atheism? Well, that's completely material. You don't have any belief of any outside power or anything outside of the material reality. And that includes no life after death and all of these things. And so if that's been your upbringing or your chosen belief system, and then you start to question things, it can be very confusing because it feels like religious. And you might be against religion, but you're still a spiritual person, as we all are.
Yeah.
And we have to go on those journeys. Yeah. So I wanted to call that out too, because I see atheism, because it's a very rigid belief system. It essentially is like a religion to me, but it's a very different experience coming from that and then starting to go on the spiritual journey.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I just had this flash. I almost said, I don't think I know anyone who identifies as an atheist, but then I have been in places where someone has said, I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in any of that. And there's always this really, like, I don't want to say negative, but heavier, like, having to defend, that I don't believe in anything, because I think it's that, obviously, yes, it is a deep conviction to not believe in anything other than the material world. I feel like this day and age, that takes work. Like, you have to really, for whatever reason, want to shut all that down, because there is just so much around us, even just with access to everything. So I feel like that that feels like really hard work to me to stay on that path, like exhausting work. And if I think about the, a handful again of people that I know, it feels like they're carrying a heavy burden to try and hold on to that belief. And it's probably because there is this knowing that there is so much more than just what we can see and touch and, all those things. So
I think
I hadn't thought of it that way.
Well, this was a common question, like can spirituality be proven? Is it scientific and all of these things? It's something we'll probably go into more detail about in future episodes. But from that atheist perspective, and I don't, again, just like I don't judge anyone who's choosing a specific religion unless they're actively, consciously doing harm to other people. But it's the same with atheists. If that's how you choose to, that's your chosen belief system, I'm like fine with that, because we all have free will. That's part of our spirit is having free will. But I think there is a lot of judgment because the basis of that belief system is evidence. And this is the thing. I think this is changing a lot now, and a lot of people are going to start to become very confused or conflicted because with the advancement of quantum science and our understanding of that, we are blowing open what we knew as facts around the unseen. So I think that part's really interesting too. There's a lot of judgment from the people who believe this around there not being evidence, but I think that's actually changing, and that's going to probably open a lot of people up to new ways of thinking and perhaps being a bit less rigid.
Yeah, and I don't even think you have to be on a spiritual journey to see all of that proof. Just the science, when you hear people who are out in the mainstream talking about, I mean, even if we think about Tesla and the technology that's been tapped into in the energy and, originally Nikola Tesla understanding that the free energy and being able to harness that and moving into these, electric cars and just all these things. Like, I think there's so much evidence that if you need some kind of proof, if that's kind of how your mind works, you can find it everywhere. And it's just going to become more and more mainstream. I know listening to some podcasts that are not, quote unquote, spiritual in nature, general podcasts, I'm amazed how many times things are referenced, like your energetic body. We know these magnetic fields. People are using the word quantum, which maybe we should say what that is. That might be helpful. It is out there in more conversations. And so how do you define quantum? For those who are like, quantum leap, I'm thinking of like sci-fi, Doctor Who. There was a show, wasn't there? Quantum Leap or something?
Leap was a show,
yeah. I never really watched that show.
It was
time
about
travel.
timeline jumping.
Okay. Oh, timeline jump. Okay.
So yes, time travel. Yeah. I remember I hated all the science stuff when I was a kid. I'm not very good at it now. So my explanation's probably not going to be particularly scientific or technical. It's going to be very like esoteric. But
I want the Natalie definition.
I see quantum just as meaning like the infinite possibility kind of, in a very, very broad sense. So obviously it depends on what we're talking about. Like quantum computing is, again, it's just like computing with infinite possibility, not limited. That's how I see it. It's probably not the correct definition, but I feel like it's a term that we have that's so limited by our limited understanding of the nature of reality. And we are going to have an evolving understanding of what quantum actually means as we have more and more and more discoveries around, like all the quantum science. It's a pretty exciting time we're in.
Yeah. And I just see quantum as, everything outside of us, all the stuff that's unseen, where we can harness this potential because we're not limiting ourselves to just this physical 3D. What can we, again, reach, touch, smell, taste, like what else is out there? And it's like that other field that is not just our, if I picture it in my mind, it's like I see my body, and then the quantum is everything that's around it and outside of it and just spans forever, like you said, infinite.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Does spirituality have to follow a specific belief system?
No, I think it follows your belief system. And I think, we've definitely touched on that a bit through the religion and through really the conversation so far. Is I feel like this is where you figure out what resonates for you, what you want to bring into your day-to-day life.
I had something in my notes which relates really well to this question, that spirituality is more personal and fluid. So I think it is an open, flowing path of discovery that's informed by your internal compass, your intuition, your remembering of your wisdom, which can be your unique wisdom that you've carried from, say, past lives, or from your own, like, current life. It can be encoded in you through your genetics. It can be ancestral imprints in your DNA. There's like so many places wisdom comes from. And I think that wisdom is something we get when knowledge marries with experience, and it's something that we get as we grow. But I don't think you have to be old to be wise. There's lots of people who are quite young who have specific wisdom around specific things they've lived through, for instance. So I think I almost want to say that the belief system is like the unlocking or gaining of wisdom almost. And like you said, it's completely unique to each and every one of us. I also want to say that I think the ultimate belief system, if you're a spiritual person, is truth. And truth isn't fact. Truth is unique to every single person, and it's based on your own morality, your experience, your intellectual understanding of things, and each of us have a different version of all of those things. So yeah, I think truth is actually the guiding belief system, but that's not specific at all. That's completely unique to everyone.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And I love that you said that. And in the end, I feel like if you understand that spirituality all comes down to this foundation of love, it's like it's accessible to everyone. How can it be bad? That there is no way to do it other than, like, it could look like you just believing I am loved, I love others, and that's it. Like, you don't have to have structure around that. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to change anything else other than if you can kind of hold on to that knowing, or remember that knowing. There doesn't need to be a container around that of what that looks like, or how we do that, how we receive it, how we give it.
Yeah. And like, when it comes down to it, love is the ultimate truth. So I think I want to just explain a bit more what I meant by truth, because truth can mean that someone's right and someone's wrong, but actually no, two people can have differing opinions on a question, but both can be true at the same time. And we know, it's just like love. How do we know that something is true? We feel it. We feel it in our intuition. We feel it in our heart. It's another way to describe that is alignment. You might hear that sometimes, that we're in alignment or out of alignment. Well, that's like our internal indicator of truth, the ultimate truth. So yeah, I just wanted to explain that a little bit more, that it's not about judgments and right and wrong or facts or anything like that. It's actually about alignment with the highest force, I guess. So the next question, and I think we've talked about this a lot already, but that is, why do people seek spirituality?
So in my experience, it's usually either someone is suffering and they're looking for other answers, that perhaps whatever it is they've tried so far just is not helping. It's not giving them any type of comfort or relief, or maybe there's things that they've done in the past, like leaning on more, it could be a religious practice or maybe not, and feeling like either something's missing or they're not getting what they need. And so I think that's when someone opens the door, where someone presents something that all of a sudden it feels like, oh my gosh, this is making me feel better. So I do feel like a lot of times it's when we're in these dark places, you might hear some people mention like a dark night of the soul, where they're, really going through some heavy stuff and they're needing support. And I think a lot of times that's when people come to spirituality, is because they're looking for something, they're seeking, which is how I describe myself, in my first episode, and share a bit about my circuitous route to where I am today. I think a lot of us are in the same boat. And for me, particularly the time, during the pandemic, where it just felt like, oh my gosh, what on earth is going on? Literally, what on earth is going on? And what are we doing? We're on lockdown. How can I just come back to myself and not lose my mind? So yeah, so I think dark night of the soul, something really heavy, something dark. It could be big life changes, losing your job, losing death of a loved one. I know for me, that was, I kind of dipped into the psychic realm a bit because I lost my grandmother and I wanted a way to connect to her. And I thought I needed someone like that to connect to her, which in reality, and we'll talk to, multiple people about that, but we have an upcoming episode. You can access your loved ones. They're available to you. So I think it can be some of these heavy, big life changes where people are just looking for something. And I think sometimes it's just this feeling of something is missing. And so, you pick up a book or someone sends you a book and it just sparks something and you're like, oh my gosh, there's something here. And then you just follow the next thread and the next thread and the next thread until, I think I describe it as you've like woven this beautiful tapestry and you look back at all the things you've learned and realize like, this led me here, this led me here. Like there's just so many different events that I think can lead us to this point.
I'm just like shaking my head and marveling at the vision of what would my tapestry look like? Like, have you ever thought about that? Because I love that saying, but like, have you envisioned what your tapestry, the picture on your tapestry?
I just see these bright gold cords that are just kind of ethereal in nature, I think, where there's colors and things are popping and it's beautiful, like to me, when I think of all the things. And I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface on all the things I want to learn and know and dive into.
Yeah, that's so cool.
What about you?
I had this vision, it was just a glimpse, and of course it was loaded with all these different symbols, so it wasn't like some beautiful pattern, like geometric pattern. It was just symbols, almost like a treasure map, like like mapping out stuff. I think I might like sit and meditate on that one day because that's a really cool vision. And
Yay.
If you guys are listening to this and have your own visions, we would love to hear what they are if you're looking at your tapestry, because I think that's such a cool exercise. I think, you're so right about the life transitions and coming out of a time of either great struggle or suffering or, like you mentioned, a dark night of the soul. But I even think there's like, you mentioned COVID or the pandemic. That was like a life transition that was forced on all of us, and we didn't know why it was happening and we didn't know what was going to happen. So there's elements of fear and confusion and feeling lost, but the whole world's shifting, and then you like feel ungrounded and you have to reestablish what even is going on. So I definitely think I know for a fact so many people went through this process of seeking answers during that time, which led them to spirituality, which is pretty amazing. And I've met lots of people who've had that experience, which is really cool. But then I also think there's other times we have questions. There can be things that happen in what people call the matrix, like our material reality. A lot of the time they'll come through things like news or politics, where things start to not make so much sense for us anymore. And we start to think, hang on a minute, that's a bit hypocritical, or this doesn't make sense, or hey, I think they might be hiding something from us. And all of a sudden you go down some rabbit holes and you come out the other end wearing a tin hat and you're a full-blown conspiracy theorist. That is a pathway too. And I think some people get stuck in that. And I think it's actually a trap designed to take curious people who are questioning things and keep them looping in this like low vibrational place, where actually the point of that like questioning is to take you
to a higher place,
down and then up, to a higher place. And like you said at the very beginning, back to yourself, So that is another why people seek out spirituality, because they started asking questions and started unraveling some threads, and now all of a sudden they're like pondering the nature of existence. The other thing, which I think might be a bit more simple but very deep and profound, is sometimes it might be when we're in a time of suffering, or it might be through just serendipity that we have this experience where we feel something we've never felt before. That might be a sense of belonging or love, that like crazy explosion of love, or it might be an experience they have in a yoga class where they've gone for fitness and they've all of a sudden felt their energy moving in their body. They might have tagged along to some like plant medicine journey with their friend and didn't have much expectations, and all of a sudden have had this like mind-blowing experience where they're questioning everything. So there's also, I think, this either hint that you can feel more deeply or feel something different, or a full-blown experience of that shakes you up and you're just on a quest to kind of understand what that feeling was and feel it more.
Yeah. Yeah, and think about birth of anything, whether you've had a child, you've seen a child born, what a miracle it is when we think about what our bodies do, and you think, okay, this isn't just about our physical vessel being able to carry this child, or in nature, animals creating. I just think that's another way that I think a lot of people think, oh my gosh, how can that experience feels very spiritual, I think, for most, being able to witness life coming in. So not just leaving on, like I said, if you lose a loved one, but also witnessing, the creation of something. And it doesn't even have to be, life. It could be art. It could be creating something, could be an invention, or just, anything really. And how we think, oh my gosh, how did I just bring that into reality? Like you just manifested something in, real time. So I think that too, thinking of that space, I feel like a lot of people, when they go through some of those big times in their life, that definitely brings people to question more of just how does this all come to be?
Any of these events, any of these experiences can lead someone to have what we call a spiritual awakening. And this is such a huge subject to talk about. So many people come into this point of their journey of feeling like they're going through an awakening, and they have so many questions. They have so many feelings. I know this is common for you, Heather, as well. When you realize that's what's happening, all you want to do is soak up as much information as possible, right?
Yep, for sure. Yeah. I could see this being a bit, I'm sure I Googled this, so it's just kind of, coming full circle, to have, and I don't know that anyone ever really defined what it was, other than it's all of a sudden, it's like something awakens in you. It's that feeling like you described, even with energy moving through you. It's just this knowing of, oh my gosh, this is it. Like there's all these things that I'm remembering about the world, that it doesn't have to be this dark, heavy place, that I can look around and see magic everywhere. And I know for me, something that stands out and just kind of popped into my head was, I remember this insatiable need to be in nature, even if that meant going outside for walks every day. I just needed to be in nature, and I couldn't explain it. And I remember when I Googled, people said, it's like I think I had this experience. I remember walking and feeling like everything was in like this super technicolor. Like I'd been seeing things in black and white, which of course I hadn't, but feeling like everything looked brighter. Colors looked brighter. Everything just, I don't know. It almost felt like just certain things were so much more amplified. And I remember Googling it and people describing it that way, of like this, things seemed more bright in the physical sense, which was, it's kind of weird to describe. But I remember looking at, for instance, like being outside and walking through my neighborhood and seeing grass, and it looked like a very different color than I'd ever seen it. It just was so much brighter, and it felt like nature sounds were so much louder and prominent, and something that I was hearing for the first time. And it's almost, this like uncasing of this shell maybe that we have, where it cracks open, and it's, the world just looks different in a brighter way, I would say.
Yeah. And it's a wild roller coaster. So even though we get that amazing perspective and visceral kind of experience, we can also go on the roller coaster back down to the dark night of the soul to learn more lessons. So it's a very complex topic to discuss, and lots of people have a lot of questions about spiritual awakening. So What do you think? Do you think we need a whole episode dedicated to that?
I do. And I think, part of this podcast too, one of the main themes is talking about how people came to spirituality, which some is through, sharing their awakening story. So you'll hear different ways that people, I describe kind of the gateway or the zero entry into spirituality, and it's really because that was their awakening, whether they might identify it or not. So so I think we're going to let's definitely do a whole episode on it, but I think also woven into these episodes you're going to hear different people's perspectives on kind of how they came to spirituality, which would be, I would say an awakening.
So we touched on these before. We talked about some in relation to religion, and fear and things like that. But what are some of the other common misconceptions about spirituality?
This is another one that I think we can do a whole episode on, but I think just to kind of put a bow on it here, I think one of the biggest things I see in my everyday is this feeling that in order to be spiritual, like I said, you have to leave your religion behind, you have to leave all your other beliefs behind, and this is like a new way of thinking. And I think it's, if we can think of it as a embodiment of everything that you already know, and then bringing in things that you maybe don't know yet, is a better way to see it. But also that you have to be, everyone's holding hands. It's like Woodstock or something, maybe minus drugs, or some for drugs, if you think of, medicinal plant medicine and people going down that rabbit hole with mushrooms and stuff, but that we're all just outside under the moon singing Kumbaya in a circle, and that's spirituality. Or I've heard hugging trees, which I love trees and I do hug trees. I go see a tree all the time. Natalie gets to hear me as I'm visiting my tree, but that we're really crunchy and for lack of a better word, hippie-ish, I think, is like a big misconception of, if you're spiritual, you're, I have a job, I have a successful career, I contribute to society. So I think there's a lot of people that think you have to have, even though one of my personal goals is to have an entire closet full of caftans like Gwyneth Paltrow, and that's like a goal, to be able to just live my life in comfy caftans. But needless to say, one of the misconceptions, I think, is that everyone's kind of hippy dippy or out there and not grounded in reality. And I think I like to see it as, I'm grounded in reality, but I also know that my reality is much more expanded than what's just on the ground. It's above, it's below, it's all around. And so,
yeah, I think that's so true. Another one is that we're just like full-blown weirdos.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's true. There's some really weird things about me. However, I think what we forget is that we're also really deep thinkers and really deep feelers, and they are really important parts of the spiritual journey, but also important parts of like the fabric of our society, that those deep thinkers and deep feelers, the people asking questions, are the artists, the musicians, the philosophers,
Yeah.
They're not just the hippies doing the drug journeys. Like there's a huge diversity in people who identify as spiritual or enjoy being on the spiritual path.
And like I said, I think we just don't know when we hear a song, our favorite artists, when we listen to the lyrics and we hear, that they wrote those songs, not that they've, someone else wrote the song and they just sang it. But when you hear that, you think, I think when you have a different framework, you realize like that's their story that they're sharing, their pain, their suffering, their love, all these things, but also that probably so much of that came through as a channeled message. So I think there's this misconception that it's like the othering of that. It's something that isn't mainstream. And really, I think you and I could very easily identify in a second, a dozen things that we would see as being spiritual that most people would say, no, it's just musical lyrics, or it's just this, it's just numbers on a clock. It's just, a rainbow in the sky. And there's, if we can look at it differently, and I guess also it's the label too, right? It's the label of of having things be spiritual. And maybe that too is a, just in and of itself, that it brings its own baggage maybe. And maybe part of it is, unwinding that too.
Yeah, I think so. I did want to touch on that as well, that spirituality, like especially now, it's like a trend or an aesthetic or
a hashtag.
Hashtag an industry, an identity, and it's actually just being, in its essence, it's just being. So
you don't have to buy anything to be spiritual. You don't have to subscribe to anything. You just are.
Yeah. All of that stuff is really fun. But it's not about that. And it eventually you'll come to the point where you realize it's just distraction from basically doing shadow work.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. But I also want the caftan wardrobe. That's definitely in my future as well.
We'll be prattling around in some caftans together.
Yeah, totally. This is the last question. How can spirituality impact daily life and well-being?
So I think that's what this entire podcast is going to be about, is sharing all these ways that we can bring spirituality, or it's already here really, is that it exists around us. So what are everything from actual practical practices that we can do, bring into our life to help us just navigate the world better. And it's nothing that has to be out there or feel strange or inaccessible. It's literally all things that we can access, that we don't have to pay for, that you don't have to buy. And so that's going to be all of our conversations in this podcast. We'll be talking with people, and one of the things we'll be talking to them about are for them to share daily practices, things that help them in their everyday life that, they kind of wish they would have known sooner, that they've learned on their journey. So that's going to be the whole rabbit hole we're going to take you down in this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be so many amazing examples, tips, resources that are going to be shared about just accessible ways to practice spirituality on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm so excited for all of the people that we're going to share with, and all of the amazing practical tips that are going to come through. It's going to be great.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the main goals of this podcast is also to obviously to introduce these concepts and healers, but to also share all of these resources, because there is so much out there that's free. I know you do a newsletter, you do lives where you're trying to share information all the time on social media, and all the people that we're going to be talking to offer a host of free things that you can access so that it is easy to understand. You can educate yourself, and it's not something that you have to have resources to do. All right. Well, we covered a lot. And if you have more things that you want us to cover, by all means, we're going to be sharing our website. So you'll be able to go to our website and submit any questions that you might have that maybe we didn't cover, that maybe you've Googled and feel like you don't have an answer for. That would be really fun to do, taking any listeners' questions. So we'll definitely be doing that. But hopefully this was a good outline and framework for a lot of the conversations we're going to be setting up for the podcast for the season. And so, yeah, anything, Natalie, that you think you want to share as we wrap up?
Oh, I just want to encourage everyone to, like you said, if you've got your own questions about spirituality, or especially questions about spiritual awakening, because we will be recording an episode like this about that topic in the future, definitely submit your question on the website, becomingspiritual.me, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you. This was so fun, and can't wait for the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.